Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to give a quick shout-out to Resort Loop Bob, who gave us a 5-star review on iTunes. And now, on with the show.
You're listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and have your work build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.
Hello and welcome to the Author Inside You podcast. I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Today's guest is Patty Coller, the author of Precious Purple Pearl. It's a children's book about accepting who you are and striving to do your best. Patty's an online journalist at WKBN in Youngstown, a mother of 2, and she lives with her family in Cortland, Ohio. Welcome, Patty. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Patty. So what motivated you to write your book?
Well, I was a stay-at-home mom when my daughter was first born, and we spent a lot of time together, and I got to watch her grow and try things and fail at some things and do really well at some things. And when she got to be old enough to read or to be read a story to and understand the content, that would be our ritual every night. And I would read her a story, but most of the time I would make up a story when we went to bed because, she loved to have books read to her, and we would get through many of them, and finally I would just start making up stories, and we did this at bedtime, and even driving to my mom's to visit. My mom lives she lived about 40 minutes away from us, so during those drives, I would make up stories as I was driving, and she just really loved that. So, every night she would say, "Mommy, can you tell me a story?" And one night I just started thinking, I should write one of these down. And the one story she really liked was the one about a pearl who would try, or an oyster who would try very hard to make a pearl. And she would fail every time. And I wanted to create that story of trying and failing because I felt like there were so many stories out there where people tried and they persevered and everything turned out fine. I wanted a story that would send the message that, sometimes you try and you don't always succeed. Eventually you will, but you got to keep trying. Just because you tried and you failed doesn't mean you stopped trying. So I just felt she was at an age where she could learn that lesson, and I decided to tell it to her, and then one day I just decided to write it down.
That's pretty neat. You must have been excited, and she must have been excited also. Now, I see that your mom was an illustrator. How did your mom get involved?
Well, my mom has always been a painter. She passed away a few years ago, but she always had an artistic ability, and for years she was a toll painter. And she did that for, oh my goodness, probably 30 years. And when I wrote the story down, I didn't initially think about illustrations. I was just writing the story. I didn't know where I was going to go with it or what kind of artwork I would want. And it kind of sat for a while, and then I started thinking, my mom had never done anything as far as illustration. Most of her painting was on wood, or cabinetry or something like that. But I thought, I bet she could really transform her folk art into this story. So just one day I said, "Mom, I wrote down this story. Why don't you read it and see what you can come up with as far as some artwork?" And even then when I had her do that, I didn't realize, once I started to go through the process of actually having the book printed, that an illustrator was something that I could have done on my own or have someone else do. But luckily I had my mom, and she did it, and she came up with some wonderful pictures to really help tell the story.
Yes, that is really nice. Her artwork is very, very nice, and how nice that she was right there. And if you maybe wanted to say, "Oh, I like this a little different," she could do it for you. You didn't have to worry about going through hoops, I guess.
Exactly. It was really easy to collaborate. And there were a couple things that I had seen visually different in my mind and things that she saw differently
I'm
too.
sure.
And actually, I always went with her because I would think something and she would say, well, how about this? Like the pigtails. I didn't think about the pigtails for the oyster.
Okay.
That was her idea. I'm like, oh, yeah, that adds to it. Just little details like that. So, and she was the, professional with the painting, so I didn't question her. Plus, she was my mom, and
right.
So there's that.
Yes.
So, Patty, how much did the story change from the first time you wrote it down to the actual finished copy now?
Well, when I first wrote it down, I found that it wasn't as long as I had hoped. And I thought that I needed to have some more transitions in the story. When I first started out, the oyster didn't have any brothers or sisters. And as the story went on, I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to add some family members to this story. And then I thought I would add some interactions with some friends in the story too. So that came along a little bit later. And then I it was funny because my son wasn't born yet, and at the time that we did the story, we were wondering, when I first thought about this story, there wasn't a brother in the story. When the story was finally published, Bobby was here, but I thought I would definitely want a brother to help, boost her up, someone in the family to help, give her some confidence. And so that's where he came down the road. The brother came down the road.
And did you hire a copy editor?
No, I wish I would have. That was probably one of the things. When I first did this, I didn't go through, I just did like a grammar spell check in the book. And I noticed after, years later, because I did this fairly, I wouldn't say quickly, but I was more concerned with the story and the illustrations, and I didn't really look at the copy very much. And there are some grammatical errors that, looking now, if I would have had it, a professional look at it and copyright it, I think there were some things that could be cleaned up in the book. But I'm okay. I'm okay with that too. I think, it's sort of nice to look back at, the story as it was then. But I would suggest anyone, get someone professional, because you need definitely several sets of eyes on the copy. And sometimes we get focused on the illustrations and the size of the font, the color of the font, and all that, when you actually need someone to really be critical of the copy inside the pages.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice, yes. Thanks.
Were there any roadblocks to finish it?
Yeah, it was a fairly smooth process, and I have to say a lot of that was due to the company I went through. I went through Trafford Publishing, and there were several. I mean, there's several out there, and I chose Trafford.
So that's
mostly
a self-publisher?
It's a self-publisher, yeah, and they had many different packages you could do from. They start with, give us your idea, we'll write a story, to you've written the story, give it to us, and we'll bind it, whatever. So you could, go to them with an idea or a full-fledged book, wherever you're at in your creative process. But so I was able to send them, my copy of the book, just the typewritten pages. I sent them the illustrations separately with the page number on the back of the picture that my mom. These were like canvas paper paintings for the book. Yeah, so they took my copy, they took the canvases my mom did, and just made them into the book.
But you had already you had decided what the layout was. So you had the pages already indicated, okay?
Right, exactly. And they give you a form. I remember putting down, page 1 on their form. And so they just followed sort of my grid and did what I said. And they, of course, they check back with you, and they, email you back and show you what your finished product is going to look like before it goes to press, and they bind it and everything. So, there's checks along the way. There are a bunch of add-on services like, copy editing or, story development. If you get stuck in one area, like, I'm stuck, I don't know what transition I should do here. There are all different piecemeal, sort of a la carte services. With a lot of the self-publishing companies where you can have some backup like that.
Oh, very interesting.
And did they require a number of copies with the initial order?
With the initial order, no. They didn't. To have the book made up, I think it was, I got 5 books. I paid for them to print it, and with that fee, they sent me 5 books. And then anytime I would order more, I had to have a minimum order, and it was pretty low. I think between 10 and 15. I think so. It wasn't like I had to order 100.
Great.
I think it was over 10. But then this was 13 years ago. So I don't know if those numbers have changed or
Sure.
how they're doing it now. But yeah, it was very doable. I didn't feel overwhelmed with, having stacks of books sitting in my house that I didn't know what to do with.
Yeah. And what about getting the word out? How did you tell people that you had written this book?
Well, actually, that was kind of neat because having the background I have, I was able to sort of do a little bit of PR work on my own, getting into different bookstores and contacting newspapers. And I had a little bit of a television interview about the book.
Oh.
But a lot of these companies have some really good marketing people, too. And they sent me postcards and gave me step-by-step how to contact, different media outlets and how to get the word out. I had a lot of backup with that.
Well, that's good to know because I think a lot of people are like, okay, I have this idea. I have this in my computer. Now, I need someone to guide me. So you're saying that this was a service that helped guide you what to do next.
Right. And they assigned my book ISBN. I think that's ISBN number.
Right.
They put it on Amazon for me. It's also on their website. They did all of that for me. Yeah, I didn't have to do any of that. That was all part of the printing package.
So
they handled all that.
Is that the best way to purchase the book now, through Amazon?
Right, yeah. Yep, it's still on Amazon. And, when I first started, they had a lot of recommendations, which I did, and it was successful. I would go to local booksellers and sell the book, or local, it's real easy to sell them in local shops, like your local consignment shop, or we had a gift shop in the area that I took it to. And one good thing about this book is once I did it and I sold several copies and went through that, I kind of put it on a shelf, but it's always something I can go back to. I got to raising my kids and I got busy, and I thought, it's something that's always there. And my plan is in the future is to resurrect this book and market it again. And I have tons of ideas of where, it would be perfect in a beach setting. It would be perfect up by the lake. It would,
different venues. Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe you can do some book signings there, right?
Exactly, yeah, and I did do some book signings locally when the book first came out, and those were pretty successful. We had more people than I expected. I thought just 1 or 2 people would come, but there were quite a few people there that came and bought the book. And
congratulations!
So that was encouraging, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you think about that initial investment, again, this is something that can. You can really market it a lot right now, and then you can set it on the back burner for a while, and then years later go back to it and bring it out again. So, it's always there, and you can always work with it.
Yeah, that's good thinking.
That's a great idea. I was thinking of when our children were younger, and we would go to the little bookstore in our town here to learn it out. We would see an author, and frequently we would buy the book because, you meet this person, they're all excited about their book. And,
we were excited for our children to meet the author because, look, here's someone who wrote a book.
And then you have this neat connection, and you say, remember the time we were at the Learn It Out and we bought this book? And it is just a neat experience to meet the author. So it is a great idea to find little bookstores and do book signings like that. And I'm sure they're happy to have people in there.
Oh, they are. And it's so much fun because one of the fondest memories I have when this all came out was a couple of the schools invited my mom and I to come and read the book to the students. And so they would have assemblies and we would read the book. And then it was so great because the kids would ask me questions about writing it. And then they would ask my mom questions about reading it. And I remember distinctly, I had told you about the copywriting and make sure you have a professional look at it. But this is one day day that I'm glad I didn't, because I even pointed out to the kids, I said, not everything's perfect. And if you see in my book, there are some errors in my book. I have a couple commas that are out of place, and there's a sentence, that doesn't have a period. And the kids were like, oh, like you made a mistake. I mean, it was so neat to see that here I am. I'm showing them a book, and it's cute, and they like the pictures, and there are some mistakes in it. And it was just kind of neat to get the reaction about that. They seemed really at ease with that and sort of like, oh, that's cool.
Especially since the book is about striving to do your best.
Right.
Well, it's encouraging people.
Exactly.
Go out and do what you want to do. Yeah. You have this idea.
Right.
Go work on it.
And everything
Right.
doesn't have to be perfect.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Patty, for joining us and being a guest on the Author Inside You podcast. We have just 2 more questions for you.
Okay, sure.
What's the best advice you can give fellow authors who are listening, and how's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
Well, I think that so many times when you think of a good story and you want to write it down, there are things that hold you back. And those could be, I'm not good enough to write this down, or no one's going to like my idea. And I would hate for anyone to not do it for those reasons, because you don't have to be a grammarian to write a book. You don't have to be an English teacher to do it. All you have to do is have a good idea, a story in your head that you like. And I can guarantee you, if you like it, somebody else will too. So just do it. That's the best advice I can give.
Great.
Is there an easy way for our listeners to get in touch with you if they'd like to contact you?
Oh, sure. They can reach me at my email address. It's Patty Coller at yahoo.com. And there's also a way to contact me on Amazon through the Amazon page for my book, The Precious Purple Pearl.
Okay, that's great. We'll have that information in our show notes. So you can easily go to theauthorinside.you.com to find that information. And thanks for listening to the Author Inside You podcast. And until next time, write on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.